My son said this house was too big for me, that selling it was practical. 2 weeks after my wife's funeral, he and my daughter circled like vultures around the home worth $600,000. They thought grief made me blind, that I'd just signed the papers. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one card left, hidden deep in my wife's desk. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in the living room alone that evening, the late light stretching across the hardwood floor I had laid with my own hands nearly 30 years ago. The house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of the last 2 weeks. Margaret's laughter no longer echoed down the hall, and her slippers no longer sat by the bedroom door. And yet here I was, being told by my own children that this place, our place, should be sold off like an old piece of furniture. I closed my eyes and let memory drag me back. How many sacrifices had I made for them? For David, I remember writing that first check to the university, $60,000 in tuition, spread across 4 years. I remember my hand shaking as I signed, because it was more than I had ever spent on anything other than the house itself. I had driven trucks in freezing winters, worked overtime shifts, all so he could sit in lecture halls and talk about economics and business. I told myself every dollar was worth it because it was for my boy's future. For Linda, I remember the day she turned 21. She had her heart set on a Ford Escape, the one she swore would give her freedom, let her start her career as a teacher without worrying about buses. $25,000. I didn't have it in savings, not all at once. So I pulled from a retirement account, paid the penalty, and handed her the keys. The way her eyes lit up, I thought it was gratitude. But now, sitting in this room, it feels like that light was borrowed, not earned. And then the wedding. God, the wedding. Margaret and I gave them a night to remember. We covered the catering, the flowers, and the music. $40,000. I remember standing beside Margaret, watching Linda dance in her gown, thinking, this is what parents are for, to lift their children so they can stand taller. Yet now my children stand taller by pressing me down. The house itself was more than walls and wood. It was a symbol of those sacrifices. The dining table where Margaret's lemon pie sat every Thanksgiving, the mantel where our wedding photo rested in its walnut frame, the garden where she grew roses even when her hands shook from arthritis. This place was ours, bought for $200,000 back in the early 90s, now worth over $600,000. But to them, it wasn't a home. It was numbers on a spreadsheet. They circled it like hawks, not for the memories but for the money. I ran my hand over the arm of the old recliner, the one Margaret used to tease me about because it squeaked. To them, it's junk. To me, it's where I held my granddaughter Grace on the day she was born. That chair carries the imprint of 3 generations. But none of that matters when your own children start speaking the language of liquidation. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. They didn't even try to hide it behind love. Dad, be practical. The house is too big. The taxes, the upkeep. Their voices carried numbers, not care. I wasn't a father to them in those moments. I was an obstacle, a signature they needed. The sting of it made my stomach churn. For a while, shock was all I had. I sat at the kitchen table staring at Margaret's empty chair, whispering, "They really said it, Maggie. They really did." My voice broke in the silence. Then came anger. A hot, slow anger that settled in my chest. And finally, beneath that, a kind of steel I hadn't felt in years. They think grief has left me weak. They think I'll sign because I'm too tired to fight. But they are wrong. I still fight myself. I whispered again, softer this time. Maggie, they think I'm finished, but I still have one part of you left. Saying her name like that filled the room with her presence for a moment, and I could almost hear her laugh, telling me not to let them push me around. It was then that I went into her study, a place that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and her perfume. The desk was neat, as always, a yellow pad on top with her handwriting slanted across half a page. I opened the bottom drawer, the one that always stuck. Inside were the usual things, old tax returns, greeting cards, and user manuals, but tucked beneath them was a pale blue folder I had never seen before. The folder was heavier than I expected. A sticky note clung to the front in Margaret's handwriting. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first thing I saw was bank statements from accounts I didn't know she had. Small amounts scattered across different banks, 8,000 here, 12,000 there, 400 in another. Not a fortune, but enough to wonder why she kept them apart. And then, at the bottom of the stack, the real shock. A property deed. Clearwater, Florida. 10 years old. Purchased under her name alone. A small house by the Gulf. My breath caught in my throat. Margaret, my careful, meticulous Margaret, had bought a house without ever telling me. Next to the deed was a letter from a management company offering to rent it out. She had declined in her own handwriting. Not yet. Keep private. Private. The word burned on the page. Why? For what? And then I found the letter addressed to me. Robert, if you found this, I'm gone. And if I'm right, the calls have already started. They will circle you, not because they need you, but because they want what you've built. The house in Florida is for you, but not on paper. You'll find instructions in the back. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game. I sat there with her words heavy in my lap, feeling the ground shift beneath me. Margaret had seen it all coming. The whispers, the small comments, the way they counted what wasn't theirs yet. She had seen it clearer than I had. And she had prepared. At that moment, something in me hardened. I wasn't just an old man sitting in grief. I was the keeper of a secret that could change everything. My children thought they had cornered me, thought they could bully me into signing away my home, my life. But Margaret had left me the power to choose. I closed the folder and held it against my chest, whispering again, "They don't know, Maggie. They don't know what you've given me." For the first time since the funeral, my shoulders eased. I felt the faintest stirrings of strength returning. I looked around the room once more, the walls, the photos, the light fading through the curtains. This house wasn't just a piece of property. It was proof of a life built on sacrifice and love. They wanted to turn it into cash, but I knew better now. Margaret had given me another path. As I placed the folder back in the drawer, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, a beginning where I wouldn't be the victim in their story. I would write my own. And with that thought, I stood a little taller. The grief was still there, but beside it now was something stronger. Resolve. They had no idea what was coming next. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before sunrise and sat at the kitchen table with the chipped green mug Margaret gave me on Father's Day. The house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum and the clock tap out each second. I laid the blue folder on the table, the one I found in her desk, and kept my palm on it like I could still touch her hand through the paper. Grief has a way of blurring things, but numbers are sharp. I read them again, every line about the house in Florida, every account, every note in her tidy slant. I felt my breath steady. I wasn't just a widower in an empty house. I had work to do. The phone rang at 7:30. David's name filled the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Linda, this time. I answered, said good morning, and listened to the way she skipped over the word Dad like it was a speed bump. She said the buyer was serious. She said cash offer. She said quick close. She said a lot of things that sounded like a real estate ad. When she stopped to inhale, I spoke slowly, because slow makes people listen. I said I wasn't signing anything. I said I needed time. I said I would take care of my own affairs. She went quiet, then tried the soft voice, the one that had gotten her the Ford years ago. "We're only trying to help," I told her. I heard her. I also told her I would be fine. When I ended the call, my hands were steady. That surprised me. I made a list on a yellow pad because lists turn fog into steps. First, bank. Second, attorney. Third, copies of everything. Fourth, locks and passwords. I circled the word bank 3 times. Then I put on the blue shirt Margaret liked, the one with the stitched collar, because courage sometimes needs a uniform. The bank manager was a woman named Keller, who had known Margaret by name and always complimented her lemon bars at the branch bake sales. She looked at me with the kind of concern that isn't pity yet. I told her I needed to update beneficiaries, remove any outside access, and open a new account in my name only. I didn't explain why, not fully. She didn't ask. She printed forms. I read every line. I asked her to add a note. No information to be released without my written consent. No verbal authorizations accepted. She nodded, typed, and slid the forms across the desk with a pen that was attached to a little chain. I signed my name, full and clean. While we waited for the computer to spit out confirmations, I asked about safe deposit boxes. She had one left. I rented it for a year, in cash. I placed copies of the Florida deed, the list of the small accounts in Margaret's name, and the original will into a manila envelope and locked it away. The sound of the metal door closing was a comfort I didn't expect. Before I left, I moved money out of the checking account the kids knew about and into the new account Ms. Keller had set up, then took a cashier's check for $10,000. It wasn't fear, it was air. Breathing room. On my way out, I changed the debit card PIN to a number only Margaret would have guessed. Not our anniversary. The year we planted the lemon tree. From the bank, I drove to a small office where my old insurance agent kept a desk. He referred me to an attorney he trusted, a woman named Susan Park, mid-40s, sharp eyes, voice like a steady metronome. She offered coffee. I said yes. It tasted like the lobby of a courthouse, bitter and thin. I told her what had happened since the funeral. The phone calls, the pressure to sell the house, the cash buyer I didn't ask for. The way David said practical was like a verdict. The way Linda said basement was like a gift. I told her about Mark Peterson, a name that made her mouth flatten. She'd seen him in probate court, she said. Polished, pushy. Then I told her about the folder, the Florida house, and the note that said, "Keep private." She did not blink at that. She only asked where the documents were stored. I told her. She said, "Good." Susan explained the word my children had learned to love, conservatorship. For the court to consider it, there would need to be a petition, a doctor's report, and evidence of confusion or risk. She said families sometimes used it like a crowbar when they wanted control. She said judges could see through that when given light. We talked about steps. A medical evaluation by my own physician, on the record, confirms I was competent. A letter from the bank confirming that account changes were initiated by me, not by any outside influence. A notarized statement of my living plans for the next 6 months, copies of everything. She said the best defense was a trail of calm decisions. "You are making them," she added. "Keep making them." Back home, the afternoon light fell across the dining table, the same table where Margaret used to set out her holiday china. I placed 4 stacks of paper on the wood and labeled them with sticky notes: house, accounts, legal, personal. I wrote the word Florida on a small blue one and stuck it inside my shirt pocket. It felt like a talisman. I called my physician's office and made an appointment for the next morning. The receptionist, who had known me for 20 years, squeezed me in. "We'll get you a letter," she said. "And Mr. Walker, I'm sorry about Margaret." I thanked her and hung up. The phone rang at 3:30. David again. I let it ring until the last second, then answered. He went straight to business. The buyer had increased the offer by $10,000 to sweeten the deal. They could close in 2 weeks. He said the market was good now, but could dip. He talked about interest rates like a banker. I said I appreciated his concern. I also said I would not be selling. Silence stretched. He said I was making it hard. I said I wasn't trying to make anything easy or hard. I was trying to make it right. He asked if he and Linda could come by to talk in person, to clear the air. I knew the air they wanted to clear was the air between my hand and a pen. Still, I told him to come by at 10 the next morning. He said he would bring someone who could explain the legal side. I said fine. After I set the phone down, I stood for a long time at the sink, looking out at Margaret's rosemary that had grown wild along the brick path. I felt her there, hand on my shoulder. Not literally, but enough. Sleep did not come easily that night. I walked the halls of my own house like a guest, running my fingers along the frames of the photos. David at 8, missing teeth, holding a Little League bat too heavy for him. Linda at 10, hair in uneven braids, wearing the necklace Margaret gave her. Margaret and I, on the day we signed for this house, a Polaroid the realtor snapped, my arm around her waist, her head tipped back in a laugh. These pictures do not put dollars in a bank, but they pay something down inside the heart. I whispered, "Maggie, I'm doing my best." And then, because I needed to hear it, "I can do this." The house settled around me, and at last I slept. Morning brought coffee and sunrise stripes on the floor. At 9:30, I set the dining table like a man preparing for a quiet war. Copies of bank forms, the letter from Susan confirming that I had retained her, a notepad, a pen that was mine, not theirs. The blue folder stayed in the study. They didn't get that today. At 10 sharp, the black SUV pulled into the driveway. David stepped out first in a suit he only wore when he wanted to look like someone in charge. Linda followed, eyes bright, mouth tight. A third man got out. Polished shoes, new briefcase. Mark Peterson. He shook my hand and introduced himself in a voice that had won juries. I noted the way his eyes scanned the room as if it belonged to him already. We sat. Mark opened with empathy like it were a script. "So sorry for your loss. Families struggle after a death. Emotions, finances, uncertainty." He used my name 3 times in 2 sentences and then turned to the subject of safety. He said large homes can be dangerous for older adults. He said there were tax liabilities, capital gains, and all sorts of complexities. He said they had found an excellent buyer, and the terms were exceptionally favorable given current conditions. He said his only goal was to help the family make a prudent decision. I watched his mouth form the word prudent and thought of a jackhammer dressed in silk. I thanked him for his concern. Then I said the house wasn't for sale. Mark's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. David leaned forward and asked me not to be stubborn. Linda reached for my hand and talked about the finished basement, the kitchenette, and how I could have my own space. The words slid across the table like oil. I pulled my hand back and folded it over the notepad. I told them I had spoken to an attorney. I told them I had spoken to my bank. I told them I was not confused, not coerced, not in danger. The room went still in the way rooms do when what's supposed to be kept unspoken gets said out loud. Mark Peterson opened his briefcase and removed a folder the color of a stop sign. He kept it closed. He changed tactics. He said there were legal tools families use to protect elders from bad actors, from scams, from manipulation. He said the word conservatorship as if it were a lifeboat. He said no one wanted to go there, but he reminded me that courts exist to keep people safe. He slid a pamphlet across the table with a smiling couple walking on a beach. The headline said, "Protecting Loved Ones." My throat went tight. I picked up the pamphlet, looked at it for a heartbeat, and placed it face down. Then David did something I didn't expect. He reached into his bag and pulled out a manila envelope, the kind you get when you pick up your school photos. He tossed it onto the table and told me to open it. I didn't touch it right away. I asked what it was. He said evidence with a satisfaction that came from someone who thinks the test is already graded. I slid out a stack of printed pages. Bank statements, highlights in yellow, notes in David's handwriting in the margins, monthly transfers, $600, each month for the last 2 years. The payee was Emily. I felt heat climb my neck. He called it a pattern. He called it suspicious. He said elders often get manipulated by people they trust. He said this could be proof that I was not in control of my finances and that I was vulnerable to exploitation. He used the word exploitation like a hammer and looked pleased when it landed. Linda wouldn't meet my eyes. She said she had noticed money moving and had been worried. She said she hadn't wanted to say anything, but for Dad's safety, she let the sentence fade. I sat there with those pages in my hands and thought about the day I set up those transfers. Emily had been a freshman. Books were expensive. Rent was high. Her part-time job barely covered groceries. I didn't tell her parents because I knew they would turn it into a ledger with my name in red. I told Emily to study hard and not to feel guilty. She had cried and said thank you. Now here I was, being handed my own kindness as if it were a crime. Shame pricked behind my eyes, not because I had done anything wrong, but because the people I raised could look at love and call it evidence. I breathed in. I breathed out. I placed the statements on the table and smoothed the edges. I said the money was for Emily's education. I said I wasn't being manipulated. I said I was a grandfather helping his granddaughter. Mark Peterson kept his smile, but his voice changed. He said generosity can be a red flag when it is reckless. He said courts look for patterns. He said the safest thing would be for me to allow temporary oversight. He used the word temporary like a Band-Aid. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough to remind my body that it belonged to me. I excused myself and went to the kitchen under the pretense of refilling my coffee. I leaned against the counter and stared at Margaret's lemon bowl. I whispered, "They brought the knife to my table, Maggie." The house held me up. When I went back to the dining room, I did not sit. I told them I appreciated the visit. I told them I had a doctor's appointment in the morning for a capacity letter. I told them I had retained counsel. I told them I had updated my bank accounts. I told them the house was not for sale. David said I was making a mistake. Linda said I was putting the family in a difficult position. Mark said he would draft a memo outlining the next steps and left his card. It was heavy stock, embossed letters. People like to hand you something you can feel when they want you to forget what you know. When they left, the house exhaled. I locked the door and slid the deadbolt, then pressed my forehead against the wood. For a minute, I let myself feel the sting. Then I got moving. I called Ms. Keller at the bank, asked her to put a verbal password on my profile, something only I would know. We picked the name of Margaret's first dog. I asked for a note on the file. No discussions with anyone about my accounts without the password, no exceptions. She said, "Done." I called Susan and told her about the meeting. I described the envelope, the statements, and the way Mark introduced conservatorship like a public service announcement. She listened, asked 2 questions, then told me to send photos of the statements and to write a short summary of the conversation while it was fresh. "Facts now," she said, "feelings later." I sat at the table and wrote it all down. Time, words, gestures. I took pictures. I sent them. Susan called back and told me to do 2 more things. First, draft a simple letter to Emily explaining the transfers and my intent, date it, sign it, and put a copy in the safe deposit box. Second, pick a neutral day to invite the kids back. Then tell Emily to be ready to answer a call on speaker if I wish. "Don't tell Emily what to say," she warned. "Tell her to tell the truth," I said. Yes, I asked Susan if I should be recording any of this. She said to check state law before recording private conversations without consent. She also said paper speaks well in court. "You're doing fine," she said before hanging up. That sentence did more for my back than aspirin. I sat with a blank sheet of paper and wrote to my granddaughter. I told her I sent the money because I wanted her to study without fear. I told her it was a gift, not a debt. I told her I didn't tell her parents because I decided to make. I told her I was proud of the person she was becoming. I wrote in my hand that is still strong, and I signed my name the way I did on paychecks for 40 years. Then I made another list. The small accounts in Margaret's name would need attention. The property taxes on the Florida house, insurance, utilities. I opened my laptop and created a folder labeled Plans. Inside it, I made a document called Roadmap. Step 1. Secure current home. Step 2. Secure finances. Step 3. Secure travel. I didn't write disappear. I didn't need to. The word was in the walls already. As the afternoon thinned, the phone buzzed again. A text from David. He said he was sorry if things felt tense. He said he loved me. He said he didn't want to fight. He said, "Could we please be practical?" He used more words than usual, which told me he had shown the meeting to himself like a movie and didn't like the ending. I replied with 3 sentences. I said I loved him. I said I would handle my affairs. I said we could meet again on Saturday at 10, same place. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji, which looked small and foolish floating on the screen. I took a walk around the block, the way Margaret and I used to after dinner when the heat finally let go. The neighbors waved from their porches. The maple leaves made that soft, papery sound they make in late summer. I thought about the word practical and what it had become in my children's mouths. A way to shrink me to fit their plans. Practicality has its place, but so does dignity. When I got home, I pulled the blue folder from the study and laid it on the table again. I didn't open it. I just looked at it the way you look at a lighthouse from the deck of a small boat. I called the number on the card Margaret had left for the property manager in Florida. A woman answered in Spanish-accented English, Maria Torres. I introduced myself, said my wife had worked with her before. She went quiet, then said she remembered Margaret, said she had been told that one day a call might come. She asked if I was safe. I said yes. She told me the house was in good shape, that the taxes were current, and that the utilities could be turned on with a call. She said that when I was ready, she would meet me at the airport herself. I thanked her. I did not make any promises. I hung up and smiled anyway. Dinner was leftovers and a slice of bread with butter. I ate at the counter because the table felt like a courtroom. After the dishes, I gathered the statements David had brought and placed them in a new folder labeled Their Evidence. I wrote a note to myself on the cover. Love is not a red flag. I slipped that folder beside my own stack. 2 piles, 2 stories. Only one would stand. Before bed, I checked the locks again. I set my phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling fan, turning the air in slow circles. I whispered, "They think I've lost my edge, Maggie." Then I repeated the sentence that had carried me all day. "They think I've lost, but the game has just begun." Saying it out loud gave it weight. The night held still around the words. Friday came with the smell of rain. At 9, I was at my doctor's office, answering questions with clear sentences, remembering dates, listing medications, and reciting the months backward. He asked if I knew why I was there. I told him. He tapped notes into his tablet, then leaned back and said I was as competent as any man my age he'd seen this month. He printed a letter on letterhead that said so. I folded it in thirds and placed it in my pocket like a passport. On my way home, I stopped at a shop that sells office supplies and bought a new file box with a lock, a handful of divider tabs, and a pack of labeled envelopes. Standing in that aisle, I realized how many fights in life are won by the person with better paperwork. Back at the dining table, I built a case the way I used to build bookshelves. Measure, cut, fit, check. The house folder now held the deed, tax statements, insurance, and a recent appraisal confirming the $600,000 value. The accounts folder held bank letters, beneficiary updates, and my capacity letter. The legal folder held Susan's retainer agreement and her business card on top. The personal folder held my letter to Emily. I placed a sticky note on that folder that read, Saturday speakerphone. At 5, Linda called. She said she wanted Saturday to go smoothly. She said she hoped we could all be civil. She said she'd bring coffee. She sounded like someone scheduling a staff meeting. I told her coffee was fine. I told her I had invited no one else. I did not tell her she'd be speaking to Emily through my phone. Some things need to arrive without an escort. I slept well that night. I woke early on Saturday and opened the curtains to let in a clear light. I wiped the table as if a clean surface could change the outcome of a conversation. At 9:45, I put my phone charger on the outlet near the table and set the volume to high. I placed my capacity letter on top of the legal stack and my bank's policy note on top of the accounts stack. Then I sat with my hands on the wood and let the house remind me who lived here. The SUV rolled in at exactly 10. Shoes clicked. Voices carried. They entered with the confidence of people who believe momentum is on their side. Linda set a cardboard tray of coffee on the table. David put the manila envelope down like a trophy. Mark opened his red folder. I watched their hands. People's hands tell the truth. David was jittery. Linda was busy straightening things that didn't need straightening. Mark's were steady, almost bored. We began. Mark summarized last time. He thanked me for considering reasonable options. I told him I was perfectly capable of making my own decisions and that the house was not for sale. I slid the capacity letter across the table. He read it, nodded, and placed it to the side. He said, capacity today does not guarantee capacity tomorrow. He said, sudden declines happen. He said, stress can accelerate them. He said, family oversight prevents disasters. The words were soft. The edges were not. David asked if we could at least sign a listing agreement to be ready. I said no. Linda asked if I had thought more about the basement option. I said I had, and the answer was no. Mark mentioned financial exploitation again, glanced at the manila envelope and said, patterns. I told him we could clear that up now. Then I picked up my phone and sent a text to Emily. Ready? It took less than a minute for the phone to ring. I tapped the speaker and the room changed shape. Emily's voice filled it like air after rain. She said hello, called me Grandpa, and asked if I was okay. I told her she was on speaker and that David and Linda were here with an attorney. I said we were discussing money and safety, and that I wanted her to answer one question. I asked her to tell us what the $600 each month was for. She didn't hesitate. Tuition, books, groceries. She said I gave it freely. She said she had never asked for more. She said she loved me and would pay me back if I wanted, though I had always told her it was a gift. Her voice did not shake. Linda whispered my name like a warning, but I kept my eyes on the phone. David said he was glad Emily was doing well, but that gifts like this could be signs of decline. He used the word decline like a diagnosis he was authorized to make. Emily inhaled, then asked her mother a question I had not asked. "Why did you tell me the money was from you?" The room went very quiet. Linda's mouth opened and closed. Mark Peterson reached for his pen. David looked at the ceiling as if he might find a better answer up there. I didn't say anything more. Not yet. I ended the call gently and told Emily we would talk soon, just the two of us. When the line went dead, the room felt heavier, like the first moment before a storm breaks. Mark cleared his throat and lifted the red folder as if revealing a dessert menu. He said there were legal remedies to prevent further confusion and possible exploitation. He said he had prepared papers to request a temporary freeze of my accounts for 72 hours while the court reviewed the situation. He said it was standard. He said it protected everyone. He said if I consented, it would be easier. He said if I didn't, David and Linda were prepared to file anyway. I looked at the red folder and felt something deep in me click into place, like a seatbelt. I told them I would not consent to any freeze. I told them I would fight any petition. I told them I had counsel and capacity, and that their attempt to control my finances would be noted as part of a pattern too. I spoke evenly, almost softly. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. I pointed to the letter from my doctor, to the bank policy note, to the tidy stacks of paper. I told them I had already taken steps. Their faces shifted in small ways that add up to a large thing. Doubt. They stood to leave sooner than I expected. Mark slid his card closer to me as if proximity could convert to agreement. David lifted the manila envelope and tucked it under his arm. Linda's eyes were wet, but held. At the door, David told me I was making this harder than it had to be. Linda said she just wanted me to be safe. I said I was safe. I said we would speak again soon. I closed the door, turned the lock, and leaned against it as the house received me. I gathered the papers into their folders. I placed the capacity letter on top again, then slid everything into the new lockbox. I set the key in a dish on the counter where Margaret used to drop her earrings at night. The afternoon light had shifted to that golden color that makes even dust look holy. I stood there and let it warm my face. Then I did one more thing. I took out my phone and typed a short note to myself, the kind of note a man wants to read later when the noise comes back and tries to claim the truth. I wrote, "They think I'm a signature. I am a person. They think grief means weakness. It means clarity. They think I'm alone. I have Margaret's plan. I have my own will. I have time." I called Susan and told her exactly what had happened, every phrase, every paper. She was quiet for a moment, then said we were in good shape. She told me to bring the documents by Monday so she could make certified copies and draft a response should a petition appear. She asked if I was ready for what might come next. I said yes. I said I was tired, but ready. She said that was the right combination. As the evening settled, I walked out to the garden. I clipped a sprig of rosemary and pressed it between my fingers until the scent lifted. I thought about the word they had repeated, practical. I thought about the word Margaret left me, private. I thought about my own word, prepared. The three of them fit together like steps on a stair. Before bed, I placed the blue folder back into the study drawer and set a note on top of it, just in case my courage tried to wander in the night. The note said, "Tomorrow you set the clock." I knew what it meant. Travel plans, timelines, decisions that would move from paper to motion. I brushed my fingers across the desk where Margaret's elbow used to rest and whispered, "I'm almost there, Maggie." I turned off the lights and stood in the doorway of the living room one last time, letting my eyes adjust to the dark shape of our furniture, the recliner, the mantel, the photo in the walnut frame. I spoke the sentence that had carried me from fear to a kind of quiet strength, letting each word fall like a small stone into a still pond. They think I've lost, but the game has just begun. Then I went to bed with my phone on the nightstand, the volume turned up, ready for the morning when the next move would be mine. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I arrived at Susan Park's office just before 10, carrying the blue folder Margaret left me and the slim binder Susan prepared yesterday with tabs that read medical, banking, property, and letters. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and warm paper. Through the window, I could see maple leaves lifting in the breeze above the wet parking lot, green and steady, as if time still belonged to me. Susan met me at the door with a nod that felt like a hand on my shoulder. We took seats on the same side of the conference table, not across from each other. It mattered. We wouldn't be squaring off. We would be a row, not a set of corners. "We keep it simple," she said. "Facts first, documents second, feelings last." She slid a letter toward me on thick paper with her letterhead at the top. It summarized what I had done since the funeral. Capacity evaluation completed, bank safeguards set, notices filed, counsel retained. I read every line and felt my breath even out. This wasn't bluster. It was proof. I placed the letter in front of me where everyone could see it, then set the blue folder on top like a compass. At exactly 10, the door opened. David walked in first, suit pressed, jaw set. Linda followed with a spiral notebook pressed to her chest as if it could absorb everything she didn't want to say. Mark Peterson came last with polished shoes and a smile built for juries. He shook Susan's hand, offered me condolences again, and took the chair opposite me, his leather portfolio resting like a small suitcase full of decisions. He led with soft language, safety, practicality, burden, and then eased toward the point that had chased me all week. "We should discuss listing the home. The market is favorable. The offer on the table is $600,000. Cash, no contingencies." "No," I said. The word felt sturdy in my mouth, as solid as the table under my palms. Mark blinked. David leaned forward the way he used to when a coach told him to be aggressive. He said taxes didn't wait, furnaces failed, roofs leaked, and at his house the finished basement was waiting, fully furnished, with a kitchenette we could add. Linda nodded so hard her earrings trembled. She talked about scheduling, about contractors, about how it would be easier on everyone. I let them speak until they ran out of breath. Then I repeated my answer, in the same tone I would use to say the color of the sky. "No?" Susan turned the conversation to paper. She spread the capacity letter and the bank's policy memo on the table like cards during a game that had rules. She asked Mark to review them before we discussed any protective steps. He flipped through, smiled, and reached for a bright red folder. "In the interest of Mr. Walker's safety and the family's welfare," he said, "we've prepared a petition for a 72-hour financial freeze pending court review." He tapped the cover with one manicured finger. "It is standard, protective. If David and Linda sign, the court can authorize it today." He explained that a clerk could stamp the order within an hour, that banks would be notified electronically, and that my access could be reduced to a daily stipend while a caseworker reviewed my choices line by line. The picture he drew was tidy, almost merciful, a velvet rope around my own wallet. I felt the insult more than the threat. They were asking a stranger to take my hand away from what my hands had built. For a heartbeat, the room felt smaller, like the air itself had to make way for that sentence. Then Susan slid a folder labeled "Banking Across the Wood." "Before we lock anything," she said, "let's read the key." She placed the medical capacity letter on the table and read the first paragraph in a voice that made even the legal terms sound plain. "I am fully capable of making my own decisions." She then read the bank manager's confirmation. Password requirements, no third-party access, new accounts opened at my instruction, and a safe deposit box in my name. She also set down a note describing the verbal password, "Only I know." "Mr. Walker's house is not a loose door in a storm," she said. "It's secured." David reached into his bag and dropped a manila envelope in front of me with a soft slap. "Open it," he said. I didn't have to. I knew the contents as well as my own handwriting. Printed bank statements, yellow highlighting, neatly circled lines, $600 each month for 2 years, from my account to Emily's. The numbers were correct. The story they wanted those numbers to tell was not. Linda looked down, as if the notebook lines might give her back a better version of herself. Mark called it a red flag. He said elders are exploited by people they trust. He spoke about patterns, about the way courts read generosity as recklessness when it repeats. I set my hand on my phone and pressed the speaker. "If we're going to hold up pictures, let's shine a light from the other side," I said. Emily answered on the second ring, voice careful and bright. "Hi, Grandpa," I told her where I was, who was there, and what we were discussing. I asked if she could explain what the money had meant to her. She did not hesitate. "It meant textbooks on time," she said, "not whatever was left on the used shelf. It meant groceries at the end of the month. It meant I could take a lab job that paid less but mattered for my major. It meant you believed I could do this." She took a breath. "You told me to keep it between us because you didn't want it turned into a fight. It was a gift. It was love." Silence sat on the table like another folder. Linda tried to find a sentence that would turn worry into authority. She said she had only been trying to protect me. Emily asked, softer than I've ever heard her, "Mom, why did you tell me it was you?" The question found the one spot Linda had no words for. David filled the space with a speech about risk and decline and the need for oversight. He was loud enough to drown out shame. He wasn't loud enough to erase it. Mark opened the red folder and slid the petition into the center of the table. At the top, it said ex parte temporary conservatorship and financial account hold. The lines for my children's signatures were empty but hungry. Susan answered with a stack of her own. Notice of representation, capacity letter, bank policy memorandum, and a preemptive objection to any ex parte order that would cause immediate and irreparable harm. She read the title slowly, a kind of prayer in reverse. Then she placed a pen in front of me. I signed. The pen rasped softly, the sound of something built rather than broken. Mark's smile thinned. He turned to David and Linda and whispered that they could still file, that a judge sometimes granted a temporary order on a thin record if family members appeared sincere enough. Then he faced me again. "If the house isn't sold," he asked, "what is your plan? Where will you live? Who will manage repairs? What is your long-term strategy?" He wanted me to say I hadn't thought that far, that chaos was inevitable. I opened the blue folder Margaret left me. On top, in her careful cursive, was a letter that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. I laid it where everyone could see. Susan read the first paragraph quietly. "Robert, if you found this, the calls have already started. They will circle you, not because they need you, but because they want what you built. The Florida house is for you. Keep it private until you need it." Then I slid out the deed. Clearwater, Florida. Purchased 10 years ago. Title in Margaret's name, with a path to me that Susan had already traced in her notes. Behind it, I placed a recent valuation from the property manager and emails confirming taxes and insurance were current. The room changed temperature. Linda reached for the deed and drew her hand back as if it might burn. David's jaw worked, then stalled. Mark reread the letterhead, his finger pressing the embossed seal. "This alters the landscape," he said. He asked whether the Florida property appeared in any estate documents the children had seen. I said Margaret chose discretion, and I honored it. He asked about value. I told him the last appraisal placed it just over $300,000. He asked whether I planned to live there. I told him the utilities could be on tomorrow, and a key already waited. Linda's voice cracked. "Why didn't Mom tell us?" The smaller question inside that one, "Why didn't she tell me?" shook the sentence apart. I told her Margaret trusted me to use it wisely, that love sometimes needed a locked drawer. David said it was unfair to hide property from heirs. Susan corrected him gently. "Your father is alive," she said. "You are not heirs. You are children." The word sat there like a mirror. Mark regrouped. "Even with a second property," he said, "we still have the core problem. Mr. Walker's safety and the management of significant assets. The house here is $600,000. The Florida cottage adds hundreds of thousands more. Combined accounts, we're discussing an estate north of $1 million. That invites risk, scams, bad actors. He glanced at the phone as if Emily might leap out of it holding a fishing net. He didn't say her name, but we heard it in the pause. I answered without heat. The bad actors sat at my dining table this week and circled a signature they wanted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I love you both, I added, looking at my children until they had to look back. But love without boundaries is surrender, Mark asked again about a plan. Susan slid a new document under my hand, the Walker Living Trust, revocable, signed today. It pulled both properties and designated accounts under one roof of paper with instructions written in plain English, funds for my care, educational support for Emily, modest bequests for each grandchild, a charitable fund in Margaret's name to keep the garden behind this house alive, a successor trustee identified, duties defined. I initialed where Susan pointed. Then I signed my name in full. The notary stamp clicked. Susan capped her pen and pressed the seal for the copy, then slid the documents into sleeves that made them look like artifacts rescued from a storm. For a moment I saw Margaret's hands arranging them, smoothing the plastic, tapping the corners until they lined up. I was breathing like a man at the end of a long hill, tired but sure-footed, surprised to find the ground holding. David's chair scraped back. He paced to the window and stared at the parking lot as if it owed him mountains. He called the trust manipulative. He called Susan greedy. He called Emily a manipulator. Linda told him to sit down. He did not. He turned on me and told me to stop this, to sign the listing, to be reasonable. He said I was choosing a fantasy in Florida over family. I set my palm on the blue folder and let the motion steady me. If you think I don't know how to play this game, I said, you're wrong. I kept the card your mother left me. Emily's voice came through the phone again. Grandpa, are you okay? I told her I was standing exactly where her grandmother put me. I thanked her for speaking plainly. I ended the call. The room exhaled like it had been holding its breath. Mark gathered his papers and told Susan he would file the petition anyway. A judge should at least hear the concerns, he said. Susan said a judge would also hear the case. Capacity, bank safeguards, clear planning, and the obvious conflict of children pressing to liquidate their father's home for their own relief. The word relief hung over the table like a cloud that refused to move. David tried one more angle. He asked where I would live, who would help me with stairs, and who would fix the roof in January. Linda softened. She said she was scared and handled it badly. She asked what she could do that didn't involve lawyers. I closed the blue folder. Choose respect, I said. Stop talking about me like a liability. Then I told them about Clearwater, a small cottage with blue shutters, a kitchen that opens to the light, a terrace where the air tastes like salt, utilities ready. A key is waiting. I'll be there soon, I said. The house here will not be listed. The words rolled through the room like thunder. David went red, then pale. Linda nodded, slow and small. Mark wrote a note that would not fix what had just shifted under his feet. We ended with handshakes that didn't reach the wrists. In the hallway, David leaned in so close I could smell the sharp cologne he wears to feel taller. You're embarrassing yourself, he hissed. People will think you've lost it. I told him the people who matter had watched me find it. They left. Susan poured water into a paper cup and handed it to me. You kept your footing, she said. She filed the objection electronically and emailed Mark a copy with the line, "Please govern yourselves accordingly." She made certified copies of the deed and the trust and placed them in a slim binder with Walker Trust on the cover. Neat block letters, for Margaret in smaller type beneath. I held it with both hands like a newborn. Rain started as I drove home, clean and straight. The house met me with the smell of wood and weather. I set the binder on the dining table where Mark's red folder had sat days ago and felt the symmetry settle something in my chest. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. We will be filing this afternoon. Please have counsel accept service. A text from Linda. I didn't know about Florida. I'm sorry. A text from David. This isn't over. I didn't answer. I made soup the way Margaret taught me when the world felt too sharp. Onion, carrot, celery, a bay leaf, and chopped rosemary from the garden. The knife thocked a steady rhythm on the board, the sound of small things becoming useful. Steam clouded the glass and turned the street outside into a watercolor. I ate standing at this counter and let the warmth guide my breath back into my ribs. After the dishes, I opened the hall closet and pulled down the box of Christmas ornaments Margaret labeled in her tidy hand. On top lay the glass bird with wire feet that always snagged on the lights. I held it in my palm and spoke into the quiet kitchen because grief makes you honest. Mags, they brought the knife to our table. I brought the lock. Susan called to confirm the petition had been filed. She summarized it in 3 sentences that described a man who did not sound like me. The earliest hearing would be later in the week. In the meantime, the trust governed distributions and the bank safeguards were held. "Keep records," she said. "Angry people make mistakes." I told her I would. I told her I would also be packing. I walked from room to room and touched the objects that would not be coming yet. The walnut frame on the mantel, the squeaky recliner that held 3 generations, the clock that ticks too loudly past midnight. I opened drawers and found Margaret's lists, written with the same tidy confidence that had just steadied me across a table. I folded 2 of her dish towels and placed them on top of my suitcase because sometimes strength is as simple as the thing that smells like home. Evening pulled a long ribbon of shadow through the living room. I wrote a note and left it on the counter where curious eyes would find it if anyone used a spare key while I was gone. The house is secure. The alarm is set. The mail is held. The neighbor is informed. I will be in touch when I land. It didn't say where. It didn't say when. Those answers belonged to me. A message from Emily lit the phone. "I'm proud of you," she wrote. "Call when you can." I told her I would, that I was okay, that the next part would be simple and hard at once. "That's life," she wrote. Night arrived soft and useful. I stepped onto the back porch and breathed wet dirt and rosemary. Somewhere, a neighbor shut a car door, and the sound crossed the yard like a small bell. I looked up into an ordinary sky and said a sentence that didn't need to be loud to be true. "If you thought I didn't know how to play this, you misjudged the student your mother raised." I slept the kind of sleep you earn by doing one necessary thing after another. In the morning, I would leave. The trust was signed. The objection was filed. The plan had moved from paper to motion. My children would wake to a map that no longer matched the ground. I would wake to a horizon Margaret chose years ago and guarded with quiet courage. Justice isn't always a gavel. Sometimes it's a key. If you've ever been treated like a signature instead of a person, that ache is real, isn't it? If you believe every elder deserves justice and respect, not management and erasure, comment the keyword now. Justice. Now watch what they do next, and how I choose to live the life they tried to redraw without me. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. When the papers were signed in Susan's office and the Florida deed was stamped into the trust, I felt a shift inside me, like a knot in my chest finally loosened. But the war wasn't done. A decision on paper still had to become a life I could live. That meant packing, moving, and letting go of the house where Margaret's roses still fought through weeds. It meant closing the door on the children I once thought would carry my name with pride. The first thing I did was call Martinez Moving, a local company Susan recommended. A crew of 3 men in blue shirts arrived on a Monday morning with a truck the color of steel. They shook my hand and asked what stayed and what went. I pointed to the piles I had prepared. Boxes labeled with David's name, stacked neatly against the wall. Plastic tubs filled with Linda's childhood keepsakes, the dolls she had forgotten, the yearbooks she never came back for. There were photo albums too, but I kept the originals and sent them copies. A family picture is a gift. A family memory is mine. I told the men to deliver the boxes to the children's addresses. No explanations, no notes, no anger. Just their belongings back in their hands, as if to say, "Here is what was yours, and here is what was never mine to keep." The rest of the furniture I tagged for donation, chairs that squeaked, tables that groaned, things Margaret and I once bought at yard sales when money was tighter than rope. Watching the truck fill was like watching years of noise fade into quiet. It hurt, but it was clean hurt, the kind that heals. The hardest part was the garden. Margaret's roses, the lilac bush she begged me to plant, the small wooden bench where she once read the paper on spring mornings. I walked the rows and whispered, "I'll take you with me, Mags. Not all of you, but enough." I dug carefully, lifted bulbs and roots, and packed them in damp burlap. The movers didn't understand why I insisted on carrying those boxes in my own truck. They didn't need to. Some things don't get logged on inventory sheets. They get carried in the marrow. 2 weeks later, I was driving south on the interstate, the Florida deed on the passenger seat, the roses in the back, Margaret's dish towels folded on the dashboard. The miles rolled out like ribbon. Each exit I passed felt like shedding another layer of weight. I stopped only for gas and black coffee. Nights, I slept in motels that smelled of lemon cleaner and stale air. I didn't care. The road was pulling me somewhere Margaret had prepared in secret, a cottage worth $320,000 tucked near Clearwater, waiting like a letter in a drawer. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house stood small but proud with pale blue shutters and a porch that faced the sea. The grass was cut, the paint fresh. A woman in her 50s, with short dark hair and kind eyes, waved from the steps. "Mr. Walker?" she called. "Maria Torres. Your wife asked me years ago to keep this place ready." She handed me keys, walked me through the rooms, and pointed out the details Margaret had chosen. A rocking chair by the window, a quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a set of dishes painted with roses. Margaret had built me a home long before I knew I would need one. I stood in the living room, bare feet on cool tile, and let the salt air drift through the open door. For the first time since the funeral, I felt not just safe, but free. Free from being treated like an account number, free from the whispers about what I couldn't do, free from the weight of betrayal. The walls didn't echo with arguments. They breathed with possibility. The first week I kept to myself, unpacking slowly, planting Margaret's roses in the sandier soil out back, calling utilities, setting the rhythm of a life alone. But freedom tastes better when shared. So I called Emily. She was moving to a new apartment near campus and worried about paying rent. I told her I had started a small education fund for her, $28,000, with 3 conditions. 1, she could never use it to bail out her parents. 2, she had to stay serious about her studies. 3, she could never tell anyone about the account except me. She cried on the phone, her voice breaking like it had when she was little, and scraped her knee. "Grandpa, why would you do this after everything?" I told her the truth. "Because love isn't a contract, it's a gift, and because your grandmother would have wanted it." She promised to keep the conditions and promised to honor the trust. And I believed her, because she spoke with the kind of gratitude I hadn't heard from her mother in years. Meanwhile, the children began circling again, but this time with softer steps. Linda called first. She started with excuses, then with tears, then with a word I hadn't heard from her since she was a child. "I'm sorry." She said she never meant to hurt me, that she panicked, that she thought she was protecting me. I let her speak, then I answered carefully. "I forgive you," I said, "but forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. We can talk, we can visit, but the choices about my life are mine." She was silent, then whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't a perfect bridge, but it was a bridge. David was harder. He didn't call at first. Instead, he sent photos of pies, blueberry, apple, pecan, like signals from a man who couldn't say the words out loud. Every week a picture, sometimes with the caption "Mom's Recipe." At first, I deleted them. Then one Sunday, I replied with a single sentence. She would have been proud of the crust. He never wrote back, but the pictures kept coming. I understood. Some apologies are baked, not spoken. I set boundaries, clear and sharp. I told both of them they could visit Florida if they came as family, not as heirs. They could call if they wanted to talk, but not to negotiate. They could send letters, but I reserved the right to leave them unopened. It was the hardest thing I had ever said, but it felt like stepping onto solid ground. Boundaries were not punishment. They were surviving. With the children at a distance, I turned to building something new. I met with Maria about starting a small local fund in Margaret's name. Together, we opened the Margaret Walker Garden Fund with a donation of $10,000 from my savings. Its mission was simple: to maintain community gardens for seniors, to plant flowers where loneliness had grown. When the paperwork was signed, I looked at Margaret's photo on my desk and whispered, "Your roses will outlive us, Mags." Peace came slowly, like dawn breaking after a long storm. I spent mornings walking along the beach, afternoons reading old novels Margaret loved, and evenings sipping tea on the porch while the air cooled. I wasn't lonely. I was alone with intention. I was no longer a signature on someone else's plan. I was the author of my own. As for David and Linda, life pushed back at them in ways I couldn't shield them from. Susan later told me their petition had been rejected outright by the judge, who noted my trust and my capacity letter. Word spread among relatives. Cousins stopped calling them. Church friends drifted away. Linda rented a smaller apartment, sold off furniture, and tried to explain. David closed his business after debts caught up. I didn't laugh at their fall. I mourned it. But I didn't rescue them. Their choices had built their walls. My job was not to tear them down, but to live outside them. One evening, Linda called again. She asked if I would ever consider moving back, if I would ever consider letting her manage bills. I answered firmly, kindly, "No, Linda, those days are gone. I love you. I will always be your father. But my life is mine, and I intend to live it." She wept quietly and said she understood. I don't know if she did, but I know I meant every word. The lesson was sharp but clear. Love without respect becomes control. A family without boundaries becomes a prison. The truth is, blood may tie us, but it doesn't excuse betrayal. Respect does. Honesty does. Choices do. I walked through the Florida cottage one night with the windows open, the ocean breeze carrying salt and possibility, and I whispered into the quiet, "I don't need them anymore, Maggie. I have myself." The words didn't feel bitter. They felt free. The contrast between us could not have been sharper. My life had shrunk in size, but grown in peace. Their lives had shrunk in peace, but grown in regret. I was surrounded by roses Margaret planted in my hands. They were surrounded by debts and silence. The balance was complete. Now, when I sit at the desk Margaret chose, looking out at the sea, I don't count dollars. I count freedoms. Freedom to wake when I choose. Freedom to plant what I love. Freedom to say no without guilt. Freedom to love Emily without apology. The old house in Ohio stands still, but its garden is now maintained by volunteers through the Garden Fund. I get pictures sometimes, children crouched by the roses, seniors sitting on the bench. Margaret's gift reaches beyond us. That is what endures, not the fights, not the signatures, not the betrayals. The gifts. And so, the story closes here, not with bitterness, but with peace. The assets are safe. The trust is strong. The future is mine to write. But the lesson is larger than paper. Family isn't just blood. Family is respect. Love isn't just sacrifice. Love is a boundary. And life isn't just surviving betrayal. Life is claiming freedom after it. I end this chapter lighter than when it began. The house is mine. The garden grows. My heart beats steadily. The children will find their paths, or they won't. That's not my burden anymore. I have one last note on my desk, written in Margaret's hand years ago. Take what we built and live it. That's what I'm doing now. And as I close my journal for the night, I let myself smile, because peace, after all, is the sweetest inheritance. The mornings in Florida have their own kind of music. The sea breathes in and out, gulls cut through the air with sharp cries, and the light falls across the porch like a soft blanket. I rise before the sun most days. I brew strong coffee, Cuban style, the way Maria taught me, dark, sweet, with that first sip heavy enough to remind me that I am alive. I sit with my cup and watch the horizon open. Every dawn feels like a promise that I kept to myself. I survived. I claimed this chapter of life. The house Margaret left me has become more than a shelter. It has become a classroom where I am the student of peace. I tend the small garden in the back, planting roses that once grew in Ohio soil but now lean toward the ocean breeze. I spend afternoons pruning, watering, touching each leaf like it carries her memory. Neighbors walk by and wave. Some stop to chat about fertilizer or the weather. For the first time in years, I talk about simple things without the weight of hidden betrayal pressing down on me. Emily visits often. She is studying marine biology now, and her eyes light up when she talks about dolphins, coral reefs, and the fragile beauty of the Gulf. She rents a small apartment close to her campus, living with 2 roommates, paying her bills, holding her head high. I see in her the best of what family can mean, not control, not expectation, but trust and freedom. She knows about the fund I set up for her, and she guards the secret like a jewel. Sometimes she hugs me and whispers, "Thank you, Grandpa. I won't let you down." And I tell her she doesn't need to prove anything to me. Her very honesty is proof enough. As for David and Linda, the picture is far different. Word reaches me through cousins and through whispers that they are living in rented apartments now, juggling bills, trying to rebuild. Linda took a part-time job at a daycare. David tried to start another business but closed it within months. They send messages sometimes, short, polite, almost desperate. Linda left a voicemail saying she wanted to come down for Thanksgiving. David sent another picture of a pie, captioned with one word, "Peace." I listened, I looked, and then I set the phone down. I did not answer. Boundaries are not cruel. They are the only way to keep love from becoming poison. I still carry the image of that courtroom, of their voices cracking when the truth burned through. I do not relive it with anger now. I relive it as a reminder of how far I have come. They had their chance to honor me as a father. They chose greed instead. The price of that choice is distance. They may never understand it, but I do, and that is enough. One afternoon, Maria invited me to a community meeting at the local center. At first I hesitated. I had grown used to silence, to living in my own shell, but she insisted. "Come, Mr. Walker. There are people here who would value your voice." So I went. We sat in folding chairs, sipping lemonade, listening to neighbors talk about gardens, about youth programs, about cleaning up the beach. When it came my turn to speak, I shared the story of Margaret's roses and how I had started the garden fund in her name. The room went quiet, then warm. People nodded, clapped, and asked how they could help. That evening, I realized that healing grows faster when it is shared. Weeks later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was David's. I knew it the second I saw the slant of the letters. My heart tightened, but my hand did not shake. I opened it. Then I stopped. No, I told myself, you don't need to let those words into your peace. I set it back in the envelope and slid it into a drawer I rarely open. Some things are better left unread. I do not need his apology. I do not need his excuses. I have my life. That night I whispered to Margaret's picture on the nightstand, "I don't need their words anymore, Mags. I have my own. I have myself." Saying it out loud was like closing a door gently, finally, without slamming it, without rage, just finality. Living here has taught me more than how to prune roses or brew coffee. It has taught me the rhythm of dignity. It has shown me that even at 69, I can start again, not in defiance, but in quiet strength. There are lessons I want to leave behind for anyone who listens. For parents, do not let your love become a leash. We give, we sacrifice, but we must also guard our boundaries. Love without limits becomes a burden that will break you. Protect your dignity as fiercely as you protect your children. For children, never treat your parents like a bank account. Respect is the true measure of love, not the number of checks written or houses built. One day, you will be old too, and you will crave not money but honor. Learn it before it is too late. For people in this modern world, money can divide families, but character defines them. In a society obsessed with inheritance and accounts, remember that the only asset that never depreciates is integrity. You can lose houses, stocks, or savings. But if you hold on to your name, your truth, your honesty, you have lost nothing that matters. A small surprise came one morning when I was watering the roses. A boy from next door, no older than 10, leaned over the fence and asked, "Mister, can you show me how to plant like that?" His eyes were wide, his hands dirty from digging holes in his yard. I laughed, handed him a pair of gloves, and spent the afternoon teaching him about soil and patience. His mother later thanked me with a pie. I realized then that life always finds a way to give you a new family when old ties fail. Sometimes blood betrays, but community heals. On Sundays, I walk down to the park. I sit on a bench that faces the water and listen to children laugh, couples stroll, and old men fish with lines that stretch into the surf. No one there knows my story unless I choose to tell it. To them, I am just Thomas, an old man with kind eyes and a steady smile, and that is enough. Each day I breathe here feels like proof that I chose correctly, proof that peace was worth the fight. I have not spoken to David or Linda in months. The silence does not hurt me anymore. It frees me. They may be out there, carrying their regrets, or maybe still blaming me. That is their journey, not mine. Mine is to tend the roses, to sip my coffee, to laugh with Emily when she visits, to wave at neighbors, to keep Margaret's memory alive, not with tears, but with flowers. Sometimes, late at night, I sit at my desk with the old clock ticking and I write small notes to myself. One of them reads, "I don't need their apology. I have my own life." Another reads, "Integrity is wealth." I keep these slips in a box I will leave for Emily someday. I want her to know that her grandfather's richest inheritance was not land or accounts, but the courage to stand alone with dignity. I finally understand that closure is not something your enemies give you. It is something you give yourself. By refusing to answer David's letter, I answered the larger question of my life. Do I need their validation to live? The answer is no. I sit here now, the sun sinking low, the air turning golden, and I whisper one last truth. Character is the only asset no one can ever take from me. Not a judge, not a child, not a world obsessed with numbers. My name, my dignity, my peace, they are mine to keep. I close my eyes and I smile. I have found where I belong. And every morning I wake, every rose that blooms, every wave that breaks on the shore reminds me. I finally chose myself. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.